Welcome to Health Club with Julia. I'm your host, health coach, and registered dietitian, Julia Campagna. I'm on a mission to bridge the gap between looking your best and living your life to the fullest. After years of over dieting, struggling with disordered eating, and destroying my social life, I finally found how to reach my dream physique without sacrificing the things I love. Now I'm sharing all my strategies and education with you. We'll be talking all things health, including hormones, metabolism, and lifestyle to help you cut out the confusion and start living. So get cozy and join the club. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Health Club with Julia podcast. I am so happy you are here. Just recently, I was having a conversation with one of my clients who has always suffered from chronic fatigue. And it's been going on for years and years and years, and it has gotten to the point where it is very, very bad. She feels like she can't stay up through the day. There's some days where she sleeps for half the day. She gets really bad migraines and headaches from it, and it's just really kind of consuming her life. And we were talking about this recently, and we had started talking about adrenals and cortisol issues, and that might be, something that's going on with her. And so we are now going down the route. She's about to get testing done for that, just to see what's going on a little bit further. And I was thinking during our conversation, and just like even afterwards, is, I feel like a lot of people do suffer from this, and they don't realize how detrimental that is. And so if you're somebody who either you wake up and you're immediately tired, even if you're getting decent sleep, or you can't make it throughout the day and you feel this really big slump midday, something might be going on a little bit deeper than even you might think. And I think the problem is that a lot of people, when they get tired, they just kind of brush it off and they're like, okay, I'm fine, I'm a little bit tired, but I'm going to keep pushing through, I'm going to keep going. And eventually it just compounds. You have this compounding effect where you get to this point that my client is at, where you just feel so tired all the time. You're always drained. You can't do the things you want to do. You don't have enough energy to stay up. You don't have enough energy to, keep up with your kids. There's just a lot of moving parts that you just feel like you're just not yourself, basically. And I feel like it's very common, and I was like, you know what? That would make a good podcast episode. So, on today's episode, I want to talk about why you're so tired all the time, if you're having this really detrimental, sluggish fatigue feeling, and what that means for your adrenal health. So, I'm going to be talking about adrenal glands, adrenal health, cortisol a lot in this episode. So before I dive into all of what it could be, signs and symptoms, how to manage that, let's go over what the adrenals even are, so you have a sense and understanding about what the heck I'm even talking about. So a little bit about the adrenals. The adrenals, or your adrenals, are two small glands that sit on top of your kidneys. The adrenal glands are responsible for the production of cortisol, which, again, I will say, cortisol is not always a bad thing. We do need cortisol for certain things like our awakening response. Cortisol is the hormone that gets us up and out of bed in the morning. It helps us stay awake in the morning and feel alert when we wake up. That is all because of cortisol. So we do need cortisol. However, if you're producing too much of it or too little of it, that's not great. Because especially cortisol can impact other things. And I'm going to talk about this compounding effect that it has, and this domino effect, if you will, on how it affects other things. But basically right now, all I'm going to say is it can affect other things like recovery, how you're dealing with stress, being able to get out of certain situations and stressful situations. It helps with just a lot more than keeping us awake in the morning. So that's a little bit about adrenals, the glands, what they do. Now, adrenal fatigue or adrenal insufficiency is when your adrenal glands are running too hard for too long during the day, and they become overworked. This then leads us into issues when they're overworked. Just like anything, if you're overworked, you can't function the way that you're supposed to. And that's where, so there's this thing called a 4-point salivary cortisol test, which is what I usually recommend for my clients to get if we are doing any sort of cortisol testing. There is serum cortisol that you can just get done through blood work. However, a 4-point cortisol test is a lot more comprehensive and goes a lot more in depth, because cortisol, the way that it should work is, picture a graph for me. So you're looking at a graph in the morning, so the first point in the graph should be highest. Cortisol should be highest at the first point on that graph in the mornings. That is again where we're getting this awakening response. That's where cortisol does spike and gets us out of bed, gets us up, gets us alert. So it's highest in the morning, and then cortisol should gradually come down during the day, where it's lowest at the end of that graph, the last point of the graph, or nighttime. That's when it is the lowest. So you want this pretty linear downward trend in your cortisol over the day. And if your adrenals are overworked, if it's running too long or too high for too long, that's where that graph, that linear decrease in cortisol throughout the day, gets a little wacky. It can either be elevated all day, or it can be almost flatlined all day, where you're not having even that cortisol awakening response, where it's kind of spiked in the morning. And so both of those aren't great and need to be addressed. So that is, again, what like adrenal fatigue is and how your cortisol should look during the day. Now, I will say one of the best things that you can do is get testing for this if you feel super fatigued all the time. Now, there's a difference between feeling tired every now and then and adrenal fatigue. And there's actually like different what's the word I'm thinking of here? Why it's not coming to me, I'm having like a total brain fart right now, but there's different stages, so to speak, or levels of adrenal fatigue. And it's really important to be, in tune with your body so that you know what's normal, what's not normal for you specifically. So if you're feeling like you're feeling more fatigued more often, look into that. Don't just push it under the rug and like think everything's going to be fine, because it can lead to adrenal fatigue, which can cause a slew of other negative effects as well. So what are some things that you can look out for when trying to locate or understand if you have adrenal fatigue? And again, this is going to be different for everybody, so know what your normal is. But some common symptoms, number one is brain fog. If you cannot think clearly, if you do not have any focus, if you feel like you're just not really, if you're just kind of out of it all day long, that can be a sign of adrenal fatigue. So check out or look out for brain fog. Inflammation is a really big cause as well as a symptom for adrenal fatigue. So inflammation can also cause the adrenal fatigue, but if you are having really big signs of inflammation, that can also be a symptom. So think puffy face, water retention, achy joints, all of those things kind of fall under inflammation. So just make sure, again, you're in tune with your body, what's normal for you, what's not normal for you. Inflammation is a really big, not only driver, but also symptom of adrenal fatigue. Another big one is just overall energy management issues. So like I already mentioned, if you are really tired when you wake up, even after getting really good sleep, if you are really tired midday and you can't last throughout the day, if you are relying on caffeine to get you through the day, also if nighttime comes and you're feeling wired and tired, like maybe you were tired all day and then nighttime hits, you're getting ready to go to bed and you're like, oh, never mind, I'm awake, I can't fall asleep, I'm having struggle getting to sleep, my brain is going a mile a minute, I'm just like super awake at night. These can all be signs of adrenal fatigue. So any sort of energy management issue, morning, evening, nighttime, anything like that, can all be signs of adrenal fatigue. Also things like lightheadedness, if you're feeling really dizzy throughout the day, if you're having higher cravings, these could also be signs of adrenal fatigue. So make sure, again, biggest thing is that you're just in tune with your body and knowing what your normal is and what might feel off for you, and not just pushing it under the rug. Now, the way that this kind of can manifest too, and I want to talk about how it affects other hormones in the body as well. So if you are constantly stressed, if you're not able to turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is quote unquote like that good stress, and that it kind of keeps us calmer, it alleviates stress, it gets us out of that stressful situation. If you cannot turn off your fight or flight response, that is going to impact your adrenals. And so I want to also emphasize, and I've talked about stress a lot of times on my podcast in many different ways, but I want to stress here that stress comes in many different forms. That could be physical stress, psychological stress, but all stressors can cause some form of adrenal fatigue. Now again, stress is necessary. We do need stress responses in certain situations to help us heal, to help us recover, to help us get out of bad situations. We do need that response. It is when it's chronically elevated that you run into issues. So if you are always in a stressed state, you're more likely to have or come across adrenal fatigue eventually at some point. So understand that stress isn't just, oh, I had a bad day at work and oh, I'm so busy all the time. Like, it can be overtraining, it can be not having an adequate diet, it can be the fact that you are up every night, late into the night, maybe you're doom scrolling, watching TV or whatever you're doing. That can be a stressor on the body. It can be simply that you are just stressed. You feel that stress, you're overwhelmed with certain situations, but there's a lot of different forms of stress. But chronic elevated stress is one of the biggest drivers for adrenal fatigue. If you are constantly in that state, you're going to run into issues. So being able to manage stress, and I'm going to talk about, strategies to manage adrenal fatigue and actually help treat your adrenal fatigue, that being one of them, but your ability to address the stress that you have and manage it and turn on your parasympathetic nervous system. These are really important features when trying to not only prevent but also treat your adrenal fatigue. So just know that a big driving force is the constant stress, and that's going to be the first and foremost thing that you have to address is what is your stress currently like and how can you alleviate that a bit more. And again, I'll talk about ways to kind of strategize and help treat any adrenal fatigue that you might be feeling. So now, how does adrenal fatigue cause other issues? So we have what's called pregnenolone. This is a hormone in our body. We have a lot of hormones in the body, but this is one that is kind of like the building block of all hormones. So our hormones have different uses and different modalities. They work in different ways and for different things, but one thing that's common amongst all of them is this pregnenolone. This is basically, like I said, the building block of all hormones. And if you are constantly stressed, if you have adrenal fatigue and your adrenals are not working properly and this cortisol hormone is kind of taking over, that pregnenolone gets kind of diverted and directed to this cortisol response and into more cortisol creation to help with this stress and with this adrenal fatigue that you're experiencing, that it kind of takes priority over other hormones. And so that's where you run into issues with other hormones. So not only is adrenal fatigue bad for you as a person, because obviously nobody wants to feel super sluggish and fatigued all the time and have impaired recovery, have impaired all the other things, but it also does impact other mechanisms in your body. For one, it can affect your digestion, so it can cause gut health issues because, again, the pregnenolone is getting diverted and directed towards the cortisol, which is taking priority over gut health and certain hormones to help with your digestion. So digestion can be affected. Obviously, sex hormones can be affected if priority is not on your sex hormones or it's getting diverted somewhere else. Obviously, that is going to impact your production of your sex hormones, and so you might run into other issues like estrogen dominance or other sex hormone related issues. So it can affect your sex hormones. It can also affect your thyroid. So again, this can affect your conversion from your conversion of T4 into free T3, those kinds of things, all of your thyroid hormones, your TPO, it really can affect your thyroid, cause hypothyroidism, can cause other issues as well. So I just wanted to, again, emphasize that do not push this under the rug. If you're feeling extremely fatigued all the time, if you're having any of those symptoms that I had mentioned, look into that a little bit deeper, because it can cause this domino effect where other things do get impaired because of this. So we don't want it to get to that point. We want to stop it and catch it sooner, so that one, you're feeling better quicker. Two, you're also not having to then heal other issues going on in the body. You can just kind of focus on this adrenal fatigue and managing and treating that itself. So that was just like side note I wanted to mention. That's very important to know. And now let's get to strategies on how to treat and manage this adrenal fatigue. So you're feeling really slumped all the time. You're really tired day in, day out. Maybe you have trouble falling asleep. Whatever the issue is for you, it doesn't feel good, right? When you have adrenal fatigue, you are just exhausted. You can't do things that you want to do, and you're just like fighting this urge to sleep all the time, and it doesn't feel good. So how can we help manage and treat this? So again, going back to what I already said, the number one focus is going to be managing your stress. This is huge because a lot of the times adrenal fatigue is caused from chronic stress, elevated stress too often, and so we need to get into this parasympathetic nervous system and turn that on more frequently. Calm down those stress responses that you're having. So remember what I said, stress can be in different forms. That could be physical, psychological. So there's different kind of methods that you'll have to work on depending on what kind of stress is highest for you. If it's physical stress, you might want to take time and lower the frequency or volume of your training. This can be short term, but I highly suggest doing that if you're somebody who works out 7 days a week, if you are doing way too much exercise, if you are just feeling like you're always constantly going in the gym or outside, whatever it is, it doesn't even have to be in the gym, maybe it's running or whatever form of exercise you're overdoing. Take that down a notch. I would recommend, if you're somebody who is very active, there's two ways to go about this. If you're somebody who is very, very active and you're overtraining, drop that down to like 2 days a week. Light exercise, no HIIT training, nothing like that, nothing high intensity. Drop that down a lot because your body needs that. If you're somebody who, on the other hand, doesn't train at all, exercise can actually be a good stressor as well. And so maybe that might even actually help you. So the thing with physical stress in the form of exercise is that it can be a little bit tricky, you know, what's right, what's not for you specifically. But I would say if you are somebody who doesn't train ever at all, try to get in some form of training. And I don't mean like going to the gym 5 days a week from doing nothing. I mean just get outside, go for a walk, maybe daily walk, maybe 5 times a week, just like a 20-minute or so walk. Just get more movement in during your day. And if you're somebody on the other end of that spectrum who is overtraining way past capacity, drop that down and lower your frequency and volume, at least short term, until you are healed and can include more of that again. I would never suggest go back to overtraining. You'll run into the same issues, but short term, lower it down until you're healed and can up that a little bit more again. So that's physical stress. Now with the psychological part of that, obviously there's different stressors that could be from work, relationships, life events, anything that might cause some psychological stress. We have to find ways to cope and manage said stress. So again, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can get outside for a nature walk, you can do grounding, you can read, you can turn on some light music, you can light candles, you can do belly breath. I love that one for my clients, and I've mentioned this on previous podcasts as well, but belly breaths, you don't need any equipment, you just need yourself and a couple of minutes, so that is a great one. But learn what coping mechanisms are best for you. Some people hate reading, and so obviously that's not going to help them cope and manage their psychological stress that they're experiencing. So find the mechanism that's going to work best for you and do that daily. Every single day, get at least 5-10 minutes of stress relief every single day, finding and using what works best for you. So number 1 is managing stress. My second tip for this is actually using light therapy. So And this is kind of what I'm working on with that client that I mentioned at the very start of this, the opening kind of like story I was telling with my current client. One of the first things that I had mentioned to her is to use this light therapy. So basically what I mean by this, and not everybody can do this, so I'm gonna talk about other methods that might help, but one very effective way to help your circadian rhythm, which helps your cortisol response and that awakening response, is using light therapy in the form of using natural sunlight. So what I suggest with this is, if you can, get out in the morning when the sun is rising, try to get out there and sit out there for 5, 10, 15 minutes and just get out in natural sunlight first thing when you wake up. It's going to be so crucial. So whenever you wake up, get outside for a few minutes and get in just natural sunlight exposure. Same thing with the evening, as the sun is setting around dusk time, try to get outside again. That can help us also with our circadian rhythm, just getting our cortisol more aligned. So it's a really effective and semi-easy tool to use. It's easy if you can do it, if you are somebody who works and you get to work like before the sun is even rising or something like that. Obviously it's not super beneficial, and I would say get any light exposure. So like if you're getting ready in the morning, if you can't get out in natural sunlight, use some sort of light exposure. If you're somebody who is in work before the sun rises, make sure you're getting ready with a lamp or a light on in your room. Just getting any light exposure can help when you first wake up. But obviously the natural light is going to be the best method to use if you can. Secondary to that is blue light, and making sure that you're lowering that at night. Blue light can negate melatonin. We need melatonin to help us feel sleepy and go to sleep. So blue light, it kind of negates that. It stops that from becoming elevated at night. So we want to drop our blue light as much as possible so that our bodies can produce that melatonin when needed to help us go to sleep. So make sure that you are dropping blue light. That is from pretty much all electronics, laptops, iPads, the TV, your phone. So no more doom scrolling, no more binge watching your favorite show into wee hours of the night. Try to get off blue light as early as possible. I mean, at least try to do it like 30 minutes to an hour before you try to go to bed. If you're just somebody who like falls asleep either with the TV on, or you turn off the TV and then try to go to sleep, you might feel like you're struggling with sleep a little bit. So give yourself some time at night to turn things off before actually going to bed. But overall, lower your blue light exposure later in the day. Then the third thing I would say is kind of going along with circadian rhythm and the light exposure is maintaining a sleep schedule. And this includes weekends. So if you're somebody who, you wake up super early during the week and then the weekend comes and you're like, I cannot wait to sleep in, and you sleep in, maybe you get up at like, 5, 6 o'clock, and then you sleep in until like 9, 10 a.m. on the weekends. That might not be super ideal. Or if you're somebody who, because this happens to me, I notoriously wake up at like 5 a.m. every day. Wake up at 5 a.m., I'm at the door at 5:30 to go to the gym. That's just like my sweet spot for getting in the gym and then getting to work on time and like having my whole day for work. But I wake up at like 5 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday, and then the weekend, I cannot sleep past like 6:30. That's like the latest I sleep. Even if I stay in bed until like 8:30, 9 o'clock, I am awake. I am up, I'm awake by 6:30 every morning. And this happens to some people, and some people are like, this sucks, like I can't sleep in, my body won't do that, why is my body not allowing me to sleep in? And it's actually not a bad thing. It's actually pretty good to contain, I don't know if that's the word I'm thinking of, a consistent sleep schedule even through the weekend, because our bodies recognize that. And so if you're somebody who has ever slept in on the weekend, or let's say you're on vacation, right? Vacation, usually people sleep in a little bit more. Think about this. You're on vacation, you sleep in, okay, again, I'm going to use the example that you wake up at like 5, 6 o'clock on a usual day, but on vacation, you're waking up at like 9 a.m. Then you go home, and the next week, you're back in your regular routine, and you're trying to wake up at 5, and you're exhausted. You're like, I can't do this. Why not? I usually wake up at 5, and I'm fine, and now I'm just so exhausted. your body is then used to waking up at 9 and it changes that circadian rhythm. So it's kind of that same gist. You want to try to keep a consistent sleep schedule even through the weekend. I would say you don't necessarily have to wake up at the same time that you always do, but I would say wake up within like an hour, hour and a half of your regular time. So if you regularly wake up at 7, I would say, yeah, you can sleep in a little bit, but make it like 8, 8:30 at the latest to maintain some sort of consistency with your sleep schedule. So that's a really great one to help manage your adrenal fatigue, consistent sleep schedule. I think that was number 3. Number 4 is exercise in the morning. So exercise, yes, can be a stressor, but it also could be a good stressor, and it actually can help with the release of cortisol and getting us up in the morning, which also helps with our circadian rhythm and helping us get to sleep at night. So if you can, and again, I know not all people can do this, but if you can, morning exercise is beneficial for adrenals and cortisol and overall the production of certain hormones going on in the body. So if you can, if you have the ability, I would suggest maybe switching to a morning routine. Again, if you can't, that is something that might not be in your control, and that's totally fine. You don't have to stress about that, but if you can, I would suggest doing that. Number, what are we on now? 5 is all about nutrition. So there's 2 parts to this that I want to mention. One is meal timing, and you might be thinking, you said before that meal timing doesn't really matter and you can eat past 7 p.m. and it's totally fine. And yes, I do agree with that. Meal timing doesn't always matter for a lot of people. The idea that you can't eat past 7 is a food myth. I do agree with that. However, for somebody who does have adrenal fatigue, this is going to be a little bit more beneficial. So meal timing, aligning it with your sleep and wake cycles. Again, this helps with circadian rhythm. This helps with cortisol release. So for those specifically who are dealing with adrenal fatigue, focus on your meal timing. So what I would say with morning, don't skip breakfast. We know that for a lot of different reasons, but for adrenal fatigue in particular, you want to eat within 1 hour of waking up. Again, going back to circadian rhythm and just overall cycles, eat within an hour of waking up. Try not to have caffeine until at least an hour after waking. Again, for more reasons than one. I've talked about this before and about like hormonal health and all of that. But also, caffeine can stimulate the release of cortisol. So if you're awake, you already had this release of cortisol, right? Our cortisol releases naturally the most in the morning. So if it's spiked up, it's coming back down a little bit, and then you have caffeine on top of that, you're keeping that cortisol high. We don't want that to be kept super high during the morning. We want that, again, to gradually come down throughout the day. So try not to have caffeine until about an hour after waking, so we're letting our natural cortisol do its thing before interrupting that cycle. So that's important for like the caffeine aspect of it. And then in terms of nighttime meals, try to have your final meal within like 3 hours or so of planning on going to sleep. So if you plan to go to bed at 9, try to have your last meal by 6. If it's later, you can push that back later, but basically within a 3-hour window of your planned sleep. So again, this isn't necessarily super, super important to follow for everybody, but if you are experiencing adrenal fatigue, this is something that you're going to want to pay more close attention to. And then the second part of nutrition that I want to talk about is overall just nutrient quality. Obviously, nutrients are very beneficial for our bodies. We need them for many, 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 many different functions and things going on inside the body. But it is also important for cortisol. So one thing to keep in mind is a vitamin C deficiency can affect your cortisol. So make sure you're having vitamin C. That's just a specific vitamin that I want you to focus more on, as well as an overall balanced diet, making sure you're having your 4 main things at every single meal: a protein, a carb source, a fat source, and micronutrients in the form of fruits and vegetables. You need all of those at every single meal. Carbs are especially important if you're somebody who follows a low carb diet. That can also affect cortisol and overall energy release. So make sure that you are having a source of carbs at every meal, and I don't just mean vegetables. That's pretty low carb. So make sure you're having a starchier carb, a more complex carb like rice, potatoes, pasta, quinoa, whatever source you want to use. Make sure that you're not following a super low carb diet, because that can also affect your adrenals. but overall focus on balance and nutrient quality, eating a lot of variety, so lots of color on your plates, making sure you're getting those 4 main nutrient needs in, and overall having balance to your diet. So those are some of my top strategies and tips to follow to help manage, treat adrenal fatigue. But I will leave you with that. So if you are somebody who feels super tired, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Health Club with Julia podcast. If you love the episode, share the podcast and tag me, and subscribe so you don't miss any further episodes. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM. Thanks for being a part of the club. See you next time.